So tell me a human being who isn't a hypocrite, right? I mean, to be a human is to be a hypocrite. The moment you have critical thinking, you tend to have certain internal contradictions that make you a hypocrite. My thing always is, and this kind of plays completely into that, the financial markets conspiracy part of the book as well, is the fact that, this whole left tends to be global while the right tends to be localized. So it's very easy to co-opt, because the right lives in the country, in local norms, in local customs and things like that. The left kind of has a global standard, right? There are certain set measures that they all apply to. And so what happens is, when you're looking at institutions like the deep state, they look for continuity when they grow international. And that's very important, because with the right, you will never have that institutional handover of memory. You will not have that globalism that the left has in that sense. So, when the Prime Minister says Andolan Jeevi, there is a great incentivization of this kind of thing with money provided by very similar actors. Isn't it curious that, say, somebody like George Soros, who goes on and on and on against authoritarians, okay, who just now wrote a piece calling Xi Jinping the biggest threat to world peace or something. He was pretty much on the same side as Xi Jinping for most of the COVID crisis. Everything that these clowns were doing, from censoring mentions of China, censoring mentions of the Wuhan lab of virology, censoring mentions of China's command responsibility in getting this out, was they're all beneficiaries of George Soros funding. So it's that whole thing that, there is this sort of international intersectional Andolan Jeevi, who on one hand will have their sort of fake fights in public, but in private, they operate together. Now, this is kind of where I disagree with Suraj and Tuhin, because in my experience, the deep state isn't this kind of one brain. It's actually a lot of extremely duplicitous people who find common interests to work in, who have an equivalent level of low scruples, that they find how they can work together even when attacking each other. And the second part of it is, to be a leftist, unless you control things, you have to be very dumb. Like if you were in the Soviet Communist Party, other than being Lenin or Stalin or Trotsky or somebody like that, you fundamentally had to have a very low IQ. You either had to be under 30 or have a very low IQ. Over 30, your IQ, for most men at least, it tends to increase exponentially. So the rest of them are essentially these sort of sheep, mindless sheep. And it takes you back sort of to that 1984 thing, that those droves coming out with their minds pre-programmed and conditioned. And that is where this whole mind control. See, what is described in 1984 is very different from what is described in Mission Shengzhan, but they're very similar in that sense, right? Because 1984 is direct brainwashing. It's a very crude kind of brainwashing, whereas what this book shows you is there's a very sophisticated kind of brainwashing that can happen. There is a very sophisticated kind of narrative control that can happen, right? There's an incentivized narrative control that can happen, and that's really important.